Hello there, everybody. My name is Spike, and welcome back to another Everything versus Nerd video. On today's video, you and me are hopping into a time machine, and we are going back to the 2000s and even earlier to take a look at some horror movies. But not just any horror movies, remakes and requels before remakes and requels ruled over the box office and streaming. As always, if you like today's video, like, comment, subscribe, share it to friends and family, leave down in the comment section below if you love the video, if you hate the video, and what you would like to see in the future, and if you'd like to see more content like this. Now, let's get started. Before we get started on diving into all these different horror movies and remakes and requels and reboots, I think I owe it to all of our audience to kind of explain the difference between the three. With the remake involves creating something new out of something existing. You take that existing property and you build a new story off of it. A reboot is a complete retelling of the story, and a requel is taking an established film and making a sequel to it that connects only to that one film that you're talking about. For example, Halloween 1978 and Halloween 2018. The term was coined on Scream 2022, Scream 5 Cream. We covered that last week's episode. And yeah, it is now a term that is predominantly used. But before it got popularized and people start using it for multiple different films, back then we would just call these movies remakes or reboots, and that's kind of all they were. Now, just to set the record straight, remakes and reboots are nothing new, despite some people thinking that remakes and reboots have been a recent thing that have ruined cinema. Remakes and reboots have been around for a really, really long time. Being a really long time, I mean the year 1922, with probably one of the most famous horror movies ever. Rather it's thanks to Robert Eggers' amazing version of the film or SpongeBob SquarePants. That movie is Nosferatu. That was the first known horror movie remake. It was an adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula, and yeah, it was basically made to be that without being legally legally tied to it, without them getting sued. So yeah, Nosferatu was the very first horror movie remake and probably the most notorious on this list. Everyone has seen Nosferatu. It's made its mark on horror and is a tried and true testament to filmmaking in the early years of cinema. The film was directed by F.W. Manaru. Sorry if I am mispronouncing the name. And we are forever grateful that the film is not lost media and that it was found and we can enjoy it till this day in all of its glory. Bump up the year a little bit, being by bumping up a little bit, taking us to an absolute horror movie classic, sci-fi classic, being 1951's The Thing from Another World. And if you're wondering, yes, The Thing from Another World was the original film and the predecessor to the legendary and beloved John Carpenter's The Thing, released in 1982. Again, proving that horror movie remakes are nothing new. They have been a staple of horror movies for a long time. I mean, they've been a staple of film just in general for a long time, but today we're focusing on horror for today. With those two very famous movies out of the way, I'd like to jump us up all the way to the 2000s. With the 2000s, we saw the rise of a lot of different horror movies. I mean, talked about this last week. The 90s brought us Scream. It was a horror movie that absolutely changed the landscape of horror. It came at a time when everybody thought that horror was done for. There was nothing new that can be done. Ghostface changed that, gave us meta horror, and from meta horror, we cut to the 2000s, Y2K, where the New French Extremity was created. If you do not know what the New French Extremity is, well, the New French Extremity is this movement in France that saw a whole lot of filmmakers pushing the needle for what was acceptable on screen. It would push not only the limits of violence and gore within a lot of these movies, but it would also push the needle for sexuality and just more emotional themes being shown for cinemas that really wasn't a norm at the time. Along with, pushing the norms of filmmaking, it also would push on the taboos of filmmaking and things that most filmmakers around that time or ever anyone ever would think of would put to screen ever. Movies like Martyrs, 2008 Martyrs, not the shitty remake, which fitting to tie in, but Martyrs released in 2008 and Inside released in 2007. These movies would pave the way for a whole new genre of movies, or a whole new genre of movies being gore equals horror. A lot of gore hounds were born from this era, with movies like Saw, Eli Roth's Hostel, and a plethora of other nasty films, but the films that coincided with this movement were remakes and reboots. Surprisingly enough, a lot, and I mean a lot, of horror movies were being remade and rebooted in the 2000s. I mean, to start off, one of the earliest, if I'm not mistaken, was the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, really leading that charge. Texas Chainsaw was one of the first movies to be remade. If you know, Texas Chainsaw, the original, came out in 1974. It's left its mark on horror media as a whole as being one of the most important films in all of horror. But it got remade in 2003. And just a little side tangent here, while doing not only research for this video, but also knowledge I just had over the years, the Texas Chainsaw timeline is really confusing. I'll leave in the description and I'll throw up a picture on screen right now. I found this German horror movie blog site that showed like the timeline for the films, and to be honest, I did not know some of these films connected the way they did. But side tangent done. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2003 was one of the first horror movie remakes. This movie, or sorry, not remakes, reboots. Even with me, a veteran of the horror genre, it gets confusing sometimes of what to term them. But the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a completely new timeline. It was the first reboot to come out, and a lot of other classic movies from the 70s, the 80s would follow in its footsteps and be remade as the years went by. Now, with all that prior information out of the way, what I really want to do here for today's video is really shine light on a lot of these movies. Some of these movies were people's first introduction into the horror genre. Some of these movies were people's first introduction into these characters, into these worlds. A lot of these remakes really did leave their mark, and it's kind of a shame how they've been forgotten. So, just to shine light on a few without really touching too much into them. Prom Night, released in 1980, 1980 slasher film, absolutely insane. It's a part of a group of films I like to call Canada's best horror movies. Um, that movie got rebooted in 2008. That movie is drastically different than the movie that we had in the 80s starring Jamie Lee Curtis, but still a pretty solid watch nonetheless. Another movie I want to talk about, which is a movie that I know a lot of people have been talking about for years, is 1974's Black Christmas. Black Christmas is probably one of the most legendary cult classic slashers there are. It inspired a lot of modern movies. It inspired Scream. It inspired the most recent hit being Terrifier 3. It's genuinely probably one of the biggest goats in the genre. That movie had its own remake back in 2006. The Black Christmas remake in 2006 is honestly a really, really good film, carrying off of a lot of plot lines that were set up in the 70s movie. and just heightening them up here. The kills being more extreme. Obviously, it's the 2000s, and the plot line itself being absolutely insane. Um, Also, too, the reason why this movie is just the best is it stars Mary Elizabeth Winstead, and any movie with her in it, you can guarantee it's probably on the top of my list. Another movie I also want to shine a light on, which not a lot of people may have known is a remake, is a movie called The Stepfather. The original Stepfather was released in 1987. Most recently, Dead Meat actually did a kill count on this movie. Really great kill count. You should definitely go watch it because I learned a lot because I myself didn't know about the original Stepfather until then. But great movie, great first movie. I don't want to dive deep into the sequel and all that, but great first movie, and it would later get remade in 2009. The 2009 remake is the first time I saw this movie, and a thing with a lot of these movies that were done in the 2000s is a lot of these movies, I guess you can say, were just kind of made. They were thrown out there. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, but a lot of them had a certain charm to them. They had that 2000s charm to them. And the one thing I remember from this movie, besides it looking like a 2000s horror movie, is the soundtrack that it had. A lot of these movies had really, really great soundtracks. But I digress. We'll touch more on the soundtracks a little bit later with other films. But another, I guess, neat little tidbit that I would like to talk about, which will kind of bring us into the bulk of the video to kind of highlight the kind of more important, not saying that all these movies are important, but the more important and predominant movies and remakes on this list. Also, in 2009, we would get Friday the 13th. The Friday the 13th reboot is honestly, and this might be controversial to a lot of people, probably one of my favorite horror movie reboots ever. It's up there with the Evil Dead 2013 reboot. It's absolutely amazing. Friday the 13th is that 2009, obviously, is a movie that is rebooting the 1980s Friday the 13th. And you find that out really quick whenever you start the movie because the beginning of the movie is just a rehash of that very first movie. Except events pan out a little bit differently. If I didn't say it at the beginning of the video already, spoiler alert for all these movies I'm going to be talking about, but the 2009 reboot changes Jason's origins a lot. Instead of him being a little swamp boy that just kind of mysteriously grew into a man and started killing counselors at Camp Crystal Lake because his mother died, he survived the drowning in the 2009 movie. He found his way to shore, and he witnesses his mother get decapitated in front of him from the bushes. From that point on, he then becomes a survivalist. And to be honest, 2009's remake for Friday the 13th is probably the scariest we've ever seen Jason in all 12 movies. Which, also another little fun fact for you, the Friday the 13th franchise has never reached 13 movies. It has had multiple fan films. Shout out to the Never Hike Alone series, Womp Stomp Films. Shout out to those guys. But for the mainline series, official movies, it has never reached 13 movies. It is stuck at 12. Also, another fun fact, it got a TV series before it got its 13th movie. Its 13th movie. Starring in today's video, I'm a professional host, I swear. Now, while we're on the subject of Friday the 13th, I would also like to highlight that these movies, a lot of these horror movie remakes, reboots, these proto-prequels, a lot of these movies, what made them so great, their charm, is the fact that they tried something new with these established IPs. Friday the 13th changed Jason from just this guy in a hockey mask or sack going around murdering people to a character with a more thought-out background. To be honest, and every horror purist really needs to look past it, Friday the 13th doesn't have that deep of lore. I mean, you can look at the Necronomicon connections, and You can try to make deeper lores with the cutscenes with Jason's dad in the later films, but with Friday the 13th '09, it truly did give us something interesting to sink our teeth into. Jason witnessing all these events, Jason then becoming a woodsman at Camp Crystal Lake, becoming a true hunter and going around, killing people on these grounds. It made him more interesting than, just a supernatural dude. It made him grounded. Also, a fun little fact I'd like to throw in for the casting of this movie. 2009's Friday the 13th stars Jared Padalecki. He is famous for his role on Supernatural. He was in this movie, and he was also in another horror movie remake a few years prior, being House of Wax, released in 2005. And before I dive into the nitty gritty of this movie and the cool things I love about this movie is a remake of a remake of a remake. This movie, I guess the history of this movie, can be traced back all the way to 1933 with a movie called Mystery of the Wax Museum. That movie was then remade in 1953, directed by Andre D. Toth, starring our GOAT again, Vincent Price. Vincent Price having his hand in another horror movie remake. And again, from 1953, we jump up to 2005. The 2005 House of Wax is a movie I saw when I was young. I didn't know about its history back then. And with this movie, not only does it have a very 2000s looking cast and a 2000s look to it with cinematography, but this movie had a pretty banging soundtrack, which I guess another side tangent here, movies don't really do that anymore. I mean, of course you have your original soundtracks, but I'm also talking about a movie soundtrack with music, pre-established music, like music from bands or an artist made for the movie or given to the movie. I'm not talking about the original score that scores the movie's background scenes or important scenes. I'm not talking about the orchestra, the instrumentals. I'm talking about the actual songs and music for a soundtrack. This soundtrack featured huge bands too, like Deftones, My Chemical Romance, Joy Division, The Prodigy. Amazing soundtrack. But also an amazing movie as well. It's a product of the 2000s. You go back, you watch this, and admittedly, I have not watched House of Wax 53 or the Mystery Wax Museum, or is that, yeah, Mystery of the Wax Museum, from 1930s. I have not watched those films, but 2005's House of Wax is a very interesting and honestly fascinating take on the story from what I've read about and scenes I've seen from all three movies. And, while we're on the subject of supernatural stars being in horror movies, we have another legendary horror movie remake, or for me, probably one of my least favorites on this list, but I know a lot of people do like this movie. This was a lot of people's introduction to this movie, or to this series, and it's My Bloody Valentine, or My Bloody Valentine 3D. Again, released in 2009. 2009 was an absolute hot year for a lot of these movies. This movie stars our GOAT, Jensen Ackles, famous from Supernatural, but in my heart, he will forever be Soldier Boy. Man, it'll be fascinating to see Soldier Boy just in a horror movie setting. I don't know, it's just a really funny thought in my mind. Besides that, side tangent done, My Bloody Valentine 3D is a remake of My Bloody Valentine, released in 1981. It is, if I'm not mistaken, one of Canada's first horror movies, or I think like one of the first popularized horror movies from Canada. It is a cult classic. It is a shame how some of the kills for this movie got absolutely butchered by the MPAA. At least I believe it was the MPAA that butchered it. They didn't like how violent the movie was, and a lot of the kills for its release are, well, now lost media. You have the toned down versions of these kills, but nonetheless, it is an amazing horror movie. It is an underrated horror movie. Every year for Valentine's Day, I watch it. It's probably one of the best. The remake, on the other hand, it's a remake of this film. I've watched this film multiple times. So when I was younger, I would watch this and the original, but to be honest with you, I don't remember a thing from this movie. I remember Jensen Ackles, and I remember some of the kills being recreated from that original film. But other than that, I do not remember much. Of course, watch it if you want to form your own opinion about the film. But yeah, My Bloody Valentine 3D. Also, if you didn't notice, the gimmick of this movie is the fact that it is in 3D. You have the funny little gimmicky scenes where they come at you through the screen, and there's a lot of CGI moments that don't look great, if I remember correctly. But before I cut into one of my favorite movies on this list, one of my favorite remakes on this list, period, I do want to give a few honorable mentions for a few films that might not have all that much of information to talk about on, or not that much knowledge to really share, but I'd love to give a huge shout out to Maniac, a horror movie released in 1980. It got its remake in 2012. It stars Elijah Wood, and for a lot of you people out there, Elijah Wood, if you didn't know, has been really active in the horror movie space. Of course, for a lot of you, Elijah Wood will probably forever be, Frodo from The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings. But, yeah, Elijah Wood's remake for Maniac is an honorable mention I want to give. I also want to give another honorable mention to The Hills Have Eyes, a horror movie released in 1977, directed by the GOAT, Wes Craven. It got its reboot, in 2006. And for the first time on this list, besides, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it got a sequel. That reboot movie got a sequel, being The Hills Have Eyes 2, released in 2007. These two movies are fascinating. These two movies, I remember being teased with these movies when I was younger to scare me. Originally, I thought that these movies were the original films. I thought The Hills Have Eyes and The Hills Have Eyes 2 were just the two movies. It was just those two movies, and that was it. I was not aware of The Hills Have Eyes 1977. Unfortunately for me, I have not seen The Hills Have Eyes 1977. But The Hills Have Eyes 2006 and 07 are two films which, again, very 2000s, very gory, and the story itself is very interesting. I mean, the first film, if I'm not mistaken, loosely follows the basics of the 1977 movie, but the second film switches it up entirely. You take these cannibal inbreds that are in these mountain caverns in the hills, and you pit them up against the military in the second film. Again, like I mentioned before, this movie's soundtrack is absolutely amazing. The soundtrack features songs from Atreyu, As I Lay Dying, and In This Moment, and a lot of really solid rock and metal songs are featured on this soundtrack, which very fitting for how these movies feel. They're very grimy, and they are definitely an acquired taste, but these films I absolutely love, despite what the tomato score might have you think about the second movie. Now, to round out this kind of end bit for honorable mentions, these next films I'm mentioning aren't really films I don't know about. They're just films I'd either want to save a whole video about or kind of just want to breeze over because they've been talked about to death. But again, in the 2000s, we got a remake for Halloween. Halloween's history has always been extremely confusing. Its timeline spirals more than the actual character of Michael Myers himself, but we got a remake for Halloween, directed by the legendary metal singer, rock singer, Rob Zombie. Rob Zombie, from his solo work, singer of White Zombie. Um, he directed the 2007 reboot of the franchise. He also directed its sequel in 2009. And we let that sequel be there. Uh, it's a movie that exists. Also, another, again, legendary horror movie that got rebooted was The Candyman. Candyman, the original movie, came out in 1992. It ended up spawning two sequel movies after that. And in 2021, we got the requel. This movie connects directly to the first movie, thankfully skipping over the second and third movie. But Candyman 2021 is a phenomenal film. If I'm not mistaken, the movie was directed by Nia DaCosta. She is a talent in all on her own. She did an amazing job with this movie, and yeah, one of the movies in the class of modern remakes and requels. But yeah, Candyman 2021, 92, Halloween 78 to 2007. Shout out to that. And shout out to all the movies I mentioned in this section. A lot of these movies are good, a lot of these movies are bad, but, go check them out. The experience of being a horror fan is not always finding great movies, but finding movies that you can just enjoy and really live in the moment. And I honestly recommend all these movies I've mentioned so far. Now, to shine a light on the two films I really, really want to talk about, and being probably not only some of my favorite requels, reboots, but also being movies I think are really important to the genre that I don't think should be forgotten. I think a lot of modern horror movie directors and directors in general should take notes. The first of this pairing is the absolutely classic and legendary 1968 Night of the Living Dead, directed by the godfather of zombies, being George A. Romero. Now, George A. Romero made this movie back in 68. Probably didn't think much of it, on how much of a cultural impact this movie would have on not just filmmaking as a whole, but the horror genre and zombies. With that being said, the movie was remade in the year 1990, and the 1990 reboot of George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead is honestly one of the best of like an early reboot. This movie is just so good. It's so good. It's directed by Tom Savini, or as a lot of people in the horror community would like to call him, thanks to Dead Meat, Gore Daddy. Tom Savini is a legend in the field. Being an aspiring SFX artist and filmmaker, Tom Savini is on the Mount Rushmore of some of the greatest figures in the horror space. But the 1990s rendition of Night of the Living Dead changes a lot of the issues that original movie had. Grant you, 1968's Night of the Living Dead is a classic. By all means, it's a classic. It's probably a movie I've watched more times than I can count. It was one of the first Criterions I ever bought. But a lot of the characterization that movie didn't hit as hard, specifically with the character of Barbara and Ben. Those two characters are kind of our two leading characters going into this movie, and the way that, I don't know, their fates are and the way that they act throughout the movie, specifically Barbara, it makes you angry after a while. But the 1990s film fixes that. From Barbara being in the 1960s film, Barbara was in a catatonic state for almost the entire movie until the end, until she died. In the 1990s film, she takes a lot more of a front role in this movie. She takes lead along with Ben, and she is a predominant figure. She is the final girl of this movie. Meanwhile, Ben, in this movie, played by the legendary Tony Todd. Again, funny enough, Tony Todd being also in Candyman. He's also here too. He was in another earlier horror movie remake, being Night of the Living Dead. Ben in this movie is such a cool character. I love Ben's recharacterization in this film. I loved him in the 60s film, and I love him here. This movie is a true landmark for being an amazing horror movie remake reboot. It is on the list. It's probably top three for me. If you're wondering my top three, it's Evil Dead 2013, Night of the Living Dead 1990, and Friday the 13th 2009. They are all interchangeable. I love all three of those films with all of my heart. But Night of the Living Dead is probably one of the earliest proofs that you can take a pre-established classic and you can make it just that much better. I love that 60s film, but dare I say, the 90s film really captures my heart in a lot of ways. Like ripping it directly out of my chest. Now, another movie, or one of the last movies we'll talk about for today's video, is a movie that I have seen for years. It has been a movie I've been familiar with the poster, I've been familiar with the killer, I've heard the name thousands of times, but it's not a movie I really dived into until recently, and it is a movie called The Town That Dreaded Sundown. The Town That Dreaded Sundown was a movie that was released in 1976. It was a movie that was selling itself as a true story. It followed
Today, Junior?
documentary style in telling its story, and it gives us honestly an iconic killer for the 70s when, in the 70s we had nothing but iconic killers. I mean, Michael Myers, Leatherface, the Xenomorph. Again, Town That Dreaded Sundown, absolute cult classic. But in 2014, it would get its reboot. Or, should I say, remake, requel? See, The Town That Dreaded Sundown 2014 is a requel and a remake at the same time. This movie is probably one of the earliest Blumhouse films, if I'm not mistaken, before Blumhouse would become what it is today with its non-consistent reputation. The Town That Dreaded Sundown 2014 takes the original movie and frames it as a movie in that universe. Town That Dreaded Sundown 2014, the 70s movie, exists in that universe as a movie. In that movie, we unravel the mystery and the history of it, and as we unravel the history and just the truth behind that original movie in this universe, we also have the killing starting up again. And it's really fascinating to see where the story goes, considering how this is a completely original thing. I mean, this is as meta as it gets, and as a lot of you can probably guess, this movie came out in 2014, and a few years prior, we got Scream 4, and yeah, if you've seen this movie, you know that it borrowed a lot of hints from Scream, which, I mean, isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I think probably hindered it whenever people went into this thinking that it was going to be something different, which it is until a certain point, which I don't particularly hate, but I know a lot of people would probably be annoyed with. It's found its fan base, it has a cult following, and honestly, it's a movie I highly recommend. You don't have to watch both movies, but if you watch both movies, you can appreciate this movie a lot more, because by God, this movie does some very unique things that I've never seen, and its twist actually surprised me. It's good stuff. It's good stuff, man. But with that being said, and us taking the time machine back here to the beautiful year of 2025, horror movie requels and remakes are still alive. This year, we just got a requel to I Know What You Did Last Summer, which actually connects both pre-established movies. In December, we are getting a remake of Silent Night, Deadly Night, which is an absolute cult classic for Christmas horror, like I mentioned earlier. And at some point in the future, Kenan Thompson is looking to try and remake Sleepaway Camp. So, as much as a lot of people like to say that, horror movie remakes and requels are ruining the horror genre, give them another look before you judge them. A lot of these reboots and requels have done a lot of good for the genre, and some of them are very fascinating. Also, too, with us being able to appreciate these reboots and requels, we have also gotten a hella ton of original content, original horror movies. I mean, just this week, we're seeing the release of Good Boy, a horror movie told from the perspective of a dog, and Bone Lake, which is looking to be pretty spicy. But that brings us to the end of the video. Again, if you guys liked today's video, let us know in the comments section down below. If you hate today's video, let us know. Like, comment, subscribe. As per usual, we upload the podcast on Thursdays. Don't forget to check that out. Also, don't forget to follow us over on Instagram and TikTok at Everything vs. Nerd Official. This has been your host, Spike, and until next time. Wait, what's this? What? Oh, wait, no, that's... Oh, no, wait, that's an amazing idea. You know, the voices in my head told me that next week's video will be Tron Legacy. Oh God, is that Jared Leto?